Howdy!
Catherine, what are you doing?
I'm getting ready to shoot a show with Minnie Purl.
Catherine, you're interviewing Linda Purl. You know, Fonzie's girlfriend?
Hey! Sit on it, Mike.
Catherine Grace O'Connell.
Welcome to Mastering Modern Midlife. I'm Catherine Grace O'Connell, and I am really excited to introduce my guest today. Many of you may recognize her. Linda Purl is an actress, a singer, a mom, as she says on her Instagram profile, not necessarily in that order. So we're going to get into that today. But you may recognize her from Happy Days, which I certainly do. And it's so fun to have you live right here with me and with our lovely women in our audience. Welcome to the show, Linda.
Thank you so much. Nice to be with you, Catherine.
You too. And we connected through a dear mutual friend, Barbie Holmes, who I adore, you adore, and many of the women out there do as well.
So, yeah, Barb is someone I know and admire. We've known each other for 15 or so years. And a few years ago, she suffered a sudden loss. She's probably spoken about it with the deaths, most unexpectedly, of her darling sister. And I think one of the things that Barb did, being such a positive person, is that in the fullness of time and coming through the grief process, she thought, well, what do I want to do? And what are my dreams that I'd left behind? One of them was to model, and off she went. And by God, she's done it at the speed of light. She's manifested this whole beautiful new chapter for herself. And anyway, it's really cool and inspiring, you know, to have witnessed that.
It's like watching this beautiful coming out party of all these midlife women. And, you know, I think of you as like a Renaissance woman as I was diving in, getting to know the many parts of you. And you talk about Barbie, there's so many women out there just coming into themselves, you know, that Phoenix rising that happens at midlife and beyond. I think we start peeling those layers of, you know, maybe who we're supposed to be, should be, told to be, taught to be, projected onto us. And we start rising the true self. So, do you relate to that at all? I saw so many beautiful parts of you that I was like, oh my God, I love this. I'm seeing the real you, the essence of you.
Well, first of all, at 65, I'm very flattered to be included in your midlife group. I'll take it. And I do agree and I don't, because one of the big surprises for me at this stage of life is how many chapters there are. I thought you have your childhood, you have your figuring it out period, and you have a lovely adult time, and then you pop your clogs. And in fact, there are so many incarnations for any of us. I think certainly our pandemic world is nurturing that opportunity to reboot, recharge, renew, reestablish. But I would say that each chapter feels like a true self. You know, we maybe have more tools to work with, and we've experienced more of ourselves at this point. So, and also a big change for me at this time over the last while, decade maybe, has been, well, now what can I give back? You know, what do I have to offer? I benefited early on so much by working with incredible people who I consider sort of in my panoply of elders. Brief and long encounters of seasoned professionals, wonderful writers and directors. And of course, the best ones taught me a lot about the craft, but more than that, even I learned a lot about life from them. So now it's more our turn, even responsibility to be able to do that. I was doing a play, Glass Menagerie, wonderful Tennessee Williams play, and the characters are the mom and then a bunch of younger people. And early on after rehearsal, we'd gone out for a hamburger and a drink or something and kind of get to know each other a little bit. And at some point I realized at the table, they were all looking at me and I thought, oh, I've become that person. I'm supposed to be telling the stories. I'm supposed to be handing over the download that I've accumulated that was given to me. And so here's now the process of handing the various batons that any of us can. Life shortcuts. Now, whether or not the kids listen to them, anybody's guess. Lord knows I didn't listen to all of them, but anyway.
That's so funny. Well, I think that's so true in life, that we can be the teacher, we can be the student, and no matter what age in life, I think we're flipping those roles. So getting back to what you had said about, when we were talking about Barbie and the loss of her sister, which was soul-crushing, devastating, but she also had a beautiful love story coming into her life late at life. She had a not-so-happy marriage and a abusive first marriage, which was more my story, but she was able to really find an amazing man, such a beautiful life partner. And you have a bit of a, what do you call it, a COVID gift, I guess. COVID had so many, many challenges, but you have your own story of really finding love later in life and, not losing hope. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about how that all happened.
Sure. Well, thanks for asking. Losing hope. Sure, I did lose hope, and not only lost it, but abandoned it. I did not at all have that expectation that I would be in a relationship again. I mean, if it happened, great, but no, life was moving along and had everybody was dead or grown up. So a few years ago. And so it was like, well, gosh, I don't have anybody to cook for, to do the laundry for, and there was this thrilling and devastating question that kept coming up in my mind. And sometimes I'd be standing in the middle of my living room and literally say out loud, now what? I mean, it was like, there's nothing, not nothing exactly, but in terms of being on the inside track of someone else's life and caring for them, raising them, helping them die, whatever it was, all of that was now behind me. So after a period of solitude, which hit me sort of reluctantly, I would say, because the first impulse was to go, well, I'll go do this and go out and do, and then just the way the world worked, I just the only place to go was inside. And so piercing that painful veil, I would say, and that resistance to not find life outside, what I ended up falling, mentally into what became for me coined as splendid solitude. And out of that solitude, I took all the furniture out of my living room. I started doing ballet classes in there. I started to paint terrible paintings, but it was irrelevant. I started to write a little bit, and there was a distillation of what really matters, who really matters, where really are my interests. Anyway, that evolved to moving to New York and for a few years. And because I thought, I don't want to leave the planet without having another round at a really, now this would not be somebody else's dream, it'd be somebody else's nightmare, frankly, but very invigorating, intellectual, stimulating. I wanted a big cultural inhale. So New York was the place, and I lived there for a few years and loved it. And then on March 12th, at about 5 o'clock, I was walking to work. I was doing a play off Broadway that I loved with people that I loved. And I got a text saying, get to the theater, Broadway is closing. You have 2 hours to get your things out. And bam, for so many of us, New York life was over. It was over. And within 36 hours, I guess, 48 hours, I had shuttered my New York apartment. I ate the next several months' rent, and decamped back to my home in Colorado. Like Scotty had beamed me aboard. It was, wait a minute, wasn't I just living and working in New York? Didn't I just, anyway,
weird,
all gone. And so to go on endlessly about this, a few months before that, 5 months before that, I'd been in LA for a couple of days at an LA sort of actor function. And somebody said that across the hall, Linda Gray was there, who's a wonderful actress, did Dallas for a long time. And I'd done a film with her and hadn't seen her in a long time. So I thought, I'm going to go across the way and find Linda. And once I got there, Linda was not there, but Patrick Duffy was. So it's like, hey, nice to see you. And we didn't know it at all, but that was the beginning. I was going back to New York the next day. I was going to see a dear mutual friend in a play. And he said, well, put us in touch. And so anyway, Patrick gave me his email and we sent a round of emails reconnecting with our mutual friend. And then it was sort of happy Christmas, happy New Year. That was it. Some possibility that he'd come through New York while I was doing the play. I did a concert in LA in February, and Patrick was there. He was in the front row. And sort of, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And but still, I mean, just a very rare, once every 6 weeks, very chummy sort of email. But once the pandemic hit, we emailed a bit more often, then we did a FaceTime, and then there was this new technology called Zoom, new to us anyway, so we tried it, and that was kind of fun. I'm not doing anything tonight, so we ended up having these Zoom sessions for 2 to 3 hours. They just sort of happened, first once a week, and then every night, and at some point, it turned a corner. Suddenly it was, maybe there's something else going on here. And the most we said was, well, when the pandemic is over, let's get together for a drink. Oh, no, let's get together for dinner. And after about 2 months, Patrick said, no, I want to, this is something more to investigate. And bless his heart, he got in his little car and he drove 23 hours to my house, and we were both terrified. It was like, well, now what? And we
this is safer now. It's like, whoa, is this real?
We didn't say, but we shared that we each thought, look, if it's a disaster, big deal. We've established this really lovely friendship, and we'd been acquaintances for 40 years, but acquaintances, capital A. So anyway, he drove over, and then we've been together since. And so that's 8 months.
Yeah, there's a pretty cute story as I was diving into. I think there's an interview you guys did fairly recently, and he talks about the details of like the car trip, maybe sleeping, because it was like 20 plus hours in the car, sleeping at maybe a rest stop, and then like how he got himself prepared for going into see you and changing clothes in the car, like using a water bottle. It was hilarious. But this has clearly been just I don't know if I'd say match made in heaven, but you guys come from very different places, which is so fascinating. He had a very long-term marriage, a wife that he clearly loved dearly. Again, I don't know him personally, but just in diving in, like a 30-plus year marriage. And you had multiple marriages, but I think I read in one of the interviews that he said something, whether or not it was going to happen like it did, he felt it was going to happen at some point. The life was going to bring the two of you together because you were really meant to be together, which I thought was so awesome.
He's a romantic guy. He is.
Sounds kind of old-fashioned, yeah.
I mean, I have to give him such credit because that took a lot of courage to come all that way. And yeah.
It's a risk. It's a big risk. Yeah, absolutely. And when you guys got to know each other, it reminds me of like back in the day. I hate to say back in the day, but you know, I am turning 60, so I'm closer to you. But back then we'd be on the phone with our boyfriends like long distance forever, right? We weren't always there. We didn't have the internet. We could talk for hours on end or write letters and love letters and cards. And you got to know somebody in a different way, right? Than you do now in this dating world where, I don't know, you swipe right or something and you meet somebody and you're out there in 2 seconds, but you guys got to really know each other in a much, much deeper level. Do you think that is established a different sort of relationship when you guys met then?
Yes, it was uncomplicated. It was just ideas. And really, I mean, the only thing we could do is sort of share life stories. Of course, we work in similar circles, not at all to compare my career to the remarkable success that Patrick has had forever. But we have a lot of this, so we know a lot of the same people. We've worked with and for a lot of the same people in a lot of the same places. We know what it's like to get up at 6 o'clock or be on set at 6 o'clock in the morning for years on end, and the grind, and also what it's like to have that arc of a career when you're struggling to be hired, and then when the jobs are coming easily, and then when things change, when it's really somebody else's turn. Anyway, so it was comforting to have none of that needed any translation about what it's like to work as an actor or as an actress.
There's an understanding. And you talk about things that I'm really familiar with, having a mother who was an actress, a stage actress, then film and TV, and then a daughter, same thing, stage actors, then film and TV. She's out in Hollywood now. And when she went, she went to UCLA and had all her resumes out so she could get her agent, right the minute she got there. But she was pretty shocked moving from stage acting to film and TV. She thought it was going to be one thing, and she really missed the stage, like you talk about. It's really, there's this beautiful art and dance and communication, this bonding with the people who are in the theater with you, and this bond with the audience and feeding off the energy of the audience. So I'd love to get into that, because most people don't have a preconception that Hollywood is so glamorous, film and TV is so glamorous, but there's a big difference between the stage, theater, and what we see in film and all the editing that goes into it. So I'd love your perspective.
Sure. Yeah, I think the theater is the actor's medium, right? Because for better and worse, you're on your own. The curtain goes up and you're off to the races, and there's a dependence, an utter dependence on the script and on your fellow actors. So that creates a particular kind of bond. But I asked that question to Robert Preston, who's gone now, but a great, speaking of the download, I mean, he had great success in film, but also had largely been a Broadway actor. Did he create the role of Music Man? He may have been the original. In any event, he did the movie, but had done a lot of theater. And I asked Bob, I said, don't you miss, we were doing a TV movie together years ago, and I said, don't you miss having a live audience when you're doing this? And he said, oh no, honey, I take the proscenium arch and I pull it down and just pull it around my shoulders. And I loved that image. And he also said, we were doing this in LA, he said, a Hollywood crew is the smartest audience you will ever have. They've seen more performances than any Broadway house, any great regional house. It's what they do. For decades, they've been going to work 12, 14 hours a day and watching actors and actresses do their stuff. So they've got an eye. And I had never, I'd never thought of a crew in those terms. So I think it can be, very, very similar. I went to see a play on Broadway. So a few years ago, it was Gene Hackman and Richard Dreyfuss. And it's a wonderful play. And neither one of them had been on stage for 20 odd years. Of course, they both started on the stage. And it was as though, so they had theater chops, they could be heard. Their performances were big enough to be seen in a 1,000-seat house. But the discipline of working for a lens when it's this close, as close as you and I are to the lens, stayed with them. And they were so, I mean, enormously talented, wildly experienced and all that, but they were so grounded in their ethos, in the truth of their work. You got that on stage. And I felt like watching their work, that because of that blended career of having been in theater and film for so long, they literally moved the art form forward. They were working on another level, at a deeper, truer, simpler, more distilled level.
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, we're going to take a break and we're going to be right back, and we're going to dive into not only your theater and like there's a lot of illusions about Hollywood and glamour and all that, but you also, the singing part is like this new sort of reinvention, whatever, but this new passion that I'd really like to dive into. And that song that we were talking about before we got on today about, I think it's A Second Chance at Love, that I misinterpreted as meaning current, but it was before. So we'll be right back after a break. So you have sort of a new, maybe it's not a new passion. Maybe you've been doing it for a while, but I love diving into your Instagram, listening to your beautiful voice, your soulful voice, and you have a passion for like cabaret singing. Obviously, you've talked about it a little bit with Patrick being in the front row. So where did that come from? Has that been going on for a while, or is this new?
As a child, I did musicals. I grew up in Japan and ended up, and I worked there really because I was a gimmick. There weren't that many people who were, put it this, there were no other kids my age who were Western, who spoke the language, who had an interest in theater, who lived there for many years. I spent about 15 years there. My folks were there for 30 years. So if a project came up that had those specifications, I got it. Anyway, one of the things ended up being musicals. But I found when I came to the States, particularly when I moved to LA, music was no longer a part of my life. I just couldn't find a way to do it. So I met some people who very kindly brought me into the world of cabaret. And it was never an idea to make a living with it. It was just to keep that going, just have music in my life. Also, as an actress, you don't have autonomy. You have to wait for the phone to ring. And that was not the case with cabaret. I could call my music director. We could build a show. We could call a couple of clubs. Lo and behold, we'd be, doing a show. So that eventually led to doing some CDs and a series of CDs. And about 12 years ago, I met an extraordinary music director, Ted Firth, who works with many, many, many talented people. He's largely a jazz pianist. So we've done, I can't remember, 4 CDs? Yeah, 4 CDs together now. We're working on a 5th. And you mentioned before we took the break about this last one I did is called Taking a Chance on Love. And when we start to do a CD, I always there's a theme, there's some, whether or not the audience or the listener even picks up on it, doesn't matter. But this one was, I was wondering in my own life, can you, popular spiritual disciplines would say that consciousness is everything and that you can manifest your destiny. So I wondered if, can you do that? Can you hatch a dream and make it come true in your life? Originally the title of the CD was one of a different song called Try Your Wings, which was just about that, come up with a dream and try your wings. So in that theme was, how do you find a dream? What if you hatch the wrong dream? What if the dream comes true and then falls apart? And Lord knows we've all had plenty of those. I have. Anyway, that was the CD, and that was the question behind it.
Well, and back to what you were saying. You're talking about consciousness and all of these things. You're speaking my language. In diving into your blog again, I think I went down a rabbit hole of multiple hours in there. And you talk about things, you are clearly like connecting to people who have passed away. You really sense energy. You see signs. You have this deep spiritual connection to really everything. So let's talk about that. Where did that come from? And, what is your belief system around that?
That's a lot to unpack. Let's
a lot
see.
to unpack. Unpack whatever parts you'd like to, because I know I can kind of then weave into Patrick's a deep Buddhist too. So obviously, you grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, not exactly where we're talking about, connecting with the other side and things.
I didn't really grow up in Greenwich. I was born there, but then when I was teeny weeny, moved to Tokyo. So my nanny was Buddhist, happened to be the sect of Buddhism Patrick practices. So that was an influence for me. But living in Japan was, profoundly influential. And one of the ways was Japan's connection to nature through Shintoism. And in the summers, we would escape town and we lived in a tiny little tear-down cottage at the base of Mount Fuji. And my summers were spent running around, climbing trees, jumping into fishing holes, and that's a big, important part of my life now. We're in LA, I swim in the ocean, and, we're in the mountains, I climb and hike and ski, and that's church for me. It's centering, it's mind, body, spirit. So anyway.
So being at 65, that certainly hasn't stopped the young girl in you who's sounds like a bit of a tomboy and loves to spend time in nature, playing in nature, no matter what you're,
I'd be gone without it. I can't imagine. It's so invigorating and humbling and beautiful and astonishing and always surprising, never the same twice. So of course,
there's a big difference between that and Hollywood, right? People have these illusions of Hollywood, and I think again in an interview, you were a young girl and you just seemed like you were this wise old soul talking to this other woman, and you were talking about it didn't draw you in by the glamour. Most people are drawn, they have this image of Hollywood. It's really glamorous, but you were number one talking about, it wasn't the glamour, it was the joy. And not that it was so glamorous, you're there working crazy long hours when you start really breaking it down, showing what goes into it. But for you, it's all about the joy, isn't it? The art, the joy, the connection, the communication.
For sure, the connection that you find with people. I mean, at this point, the friendships, the layering of friendships are so profound. That's, besides being a mommy, that's one of the deepest treasures in my life, is that weave that we have, the chosen family weave.
Our spiritual family. We have our blood family and our, like you said, our chosen family that we choose from our hearts. I say they're born from our hearts.
Yes, and those people like Barbie's one of those for me, even though she's a newer friend. I haven't known her since
20 years or so, but newer, yeah.
Where you bear witness to the various chapters of each other's lives. It's so
true. And I think friendships later in life are different, because we're different, right? We're, at least I hope, we've learned some things about ourselves. We've peeled some layers. We're deeper into ourselves. So to me, those friendships mirror that. And I think I would be remiss not to talk about, you've had some pretty amazing life partners. What was it like to have Lucille Ball as a mother-in-law? Okay, I'm like, she was amazing. I think I would be remiss not to ask that question.
It's so funny. I've never ever spoken about them in public, but Amy Poehler at the moment is doing a documentary on Desi and Lucy. And so they had reached out. And of course, I asked little Lucy's permission, go for it. So anyway, I will speak about that. I mean, they were great. They were extraordinary people. Of course, I knew them much later in life. They'd each been remarried for 20 odd years at the point at which I first, got to know them. So I would say that he was a genius. I mean, he thought like nobody else I've ever known. He didn't approach problems head on. He would sort of, look at a challenge, whatever it was, and think about it from this point of view or from down here. He had this holistic thought. He thought in 3D or 8D or whatever it was.
5D, whatever it is. Yes, a different dimension.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
And she was very, very dynamic, very private woman at the point at which I knew her. She really didn't go out. She had a beautiful home, and she had a couple of friends that would come over regularly, and she loved to play backgammon, but very loving woman who was at a comfortable time in her life, didn't have anything left to prove. So she was just enjoying her life and her friends and her home.
Wow. Beautiful. And what about Happy Days? Happy Days. We've got you've worked with some of the greats out there, Ron Howard to the Fonz, Henry Winkler, and I think your blog is loaded with politics, and I hope it's okay if we chat about that for a minute. But I think I read where Henry Winkler is a diehard Trumper. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I'm more on your end of things, and that may be completely false and out there. But I love that you're so open about it, and more again, sort of the existential questions about, what are we doing here? There's this massive divide. People out there are, being brainwashed or whatever, buying these big lies that are destroying us. So, tell me, share a little bit more about your, not necessarily your political beliefs, but the existential part of it, and how I think you share it beautifully on your blog. Really,
Thank you.
It's in here. It's really affecting us as a humanity, right?
So yeah, a few years ago, I'd cracked my tooth and I'd gone to my dentist, and jokingly I said, "Oh, are you, how are things? Are you seeing more people cracking teeth?" And she said, "Like crazy. It's been great for business." So yeah, we take it on in our soma, and it's worrisome. The thing is the lack of accountability and the lack of truth. That's new in our time. I would say there is a real diminishment of the desire, the need for truth. I mean, however, I really believe that holding to the high ground wins the day. I have to. I mean, why not? It's not going to cost us anything to believe that. And as much as any of us can avoid getting into the emotional fray of things, that's what has worked for me anyway.
I think 2020 was a rough one. It was a rough one for so many reasons, be it stirring up. Certainly we've got COVID, we've got lockdowns, we've got, Black Lives Matter and riots and protests and the election craziness and disinformation out the wazoo. But there was a real connection with Hollywood there. And back in the day with McCarthyism and painting, Hollywood as this whole crazy world. And I struggled with it. I struggled with the disinformation. I struggled with making sense of something that was so crazy, nonsensical. And like you, even though I'm pretty bold about talking about it when I can, looking at it, I like to look from a spiritual, perspective. And what are we doing? How do we come back together? How do we bring humanity back together?
There's a friend of mine, of course, I'm drawing a blank on what the foundation is. Anyway, not important. He's a recovering politician. That's how he refers to himself. And he was so frustrated with this himself that he started a foundation where he brings politicians from as disparate points of view as possible together over a long weekend for a workshop. Now, they each have to be willing to go there, but they do. And he's got a bunch of heavy hitters from both sides on his board. And he said that he's had really wonderful success, not in changing anybody's mind. That's not the end game. The end game is just to learn how to communicate with civility and just to be able to hear each other. And he said they've had very good success rates with this. And I said, well, what's the turning point? He said, it's not on the first day. Sometimes it's not even on the second day. But the turning point always comes, and it's when somebody shares something about their life. Oh, your house burned down too. Or your dog was hit by the car, or your son graduated from XYZ, but it's to find that, and usually it's some tragedy that they too, and he said, you can see the scales fall, that suddenly they're not seeing the other person as an it or an enemy, but they've made a connection. It's like, oh, we've got that. And once you have that connection, it's inviolable.
It reminds me what you're saying. It's like Rumi. There's, a field out there beyond right and wrong. I'll meet you there. And we've lost the there. We've lost that Buddhist middle way. And it doesn't mean, I think, Bruce Springsteen, what had done the whole Jeep thing, and he was getting blasted about it. People are saying, oh my God, you get in the middle of the road and you're going to be run over. And it's like, no. We've lost the middle ground so we can hear each other. So we, rather than standing over here, I'm right, this is what I believe, I'm right, this is what, but we can't hear each other. And
Nancy Reagan,
stories.
When after her husband had been shot, was in the hospital, and they were saying after she passed, this really lovely account. I guess he was her maybe press secretary, something like that. Anyway, he'd gone to her and said, who should we put in the room with your president now that he's out of danger? Who should we put in the room? His best friend, his pastor? And she said, absolutely not. Bring in Tip O'Neill. They were adversaries. And so he thought, oh, okay. So now they're in the room. Tip O'Neill is in the room with the president. And now this press secretary and Mrs. Reagan are leaving. And he said, I get chills telling this story. He said he turned around and he looked, and there was Tip O'Neill on bended knee, holding the president's hand while he's in his hospital bed. And together they were reciting the 23rd Psalm. I mean, come on, that conversation, what a beautiful moment. I mean, everything is possible from that moment. Everything
is possible, as long as, I think, we have to look at ourselves and where are we doing that I'm right, you're wrong thing too. No matter how evolved we are, I think we all have to open our ears, open our hearts. Like you said, in the end, really, we're all the same. We all want the same things for the most part in our hearts. If we talk from our hearts, you said, we share those stories. That's how we have empathy and compassion, and that's how we come together. But that's what we've lost. But I'm going to hold space for it as well.
When I looked at those images, we've all seen them too many times, of the insurrection on the 6th, I at one level you're just seeing so much anguish, and it made me, the mommy in me, wanted to go up to some of these people and say, where does it hurt? I mean, because that's fear-based, it's terror-based, that level of emotion and royal.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that that's a whole nother, I used to work on Capitol Hill. So I know I was watching, devastated myself, because I was one of those young ones there who is looking in horror at what's happening, because you go there and you're such an idealist. I was an idealist, and I look at that and I'm like, what happened? What happened? And like these are human souls too, who are pretty lost, and they're buying into something that isn't even true, but it's something that they feel they have to believe in, and they're there for this cause that is empty. But that's a whole nother show. But I want to say, yeah, I know that's a whole, that could take us, a long time. But what, I loved diving into that part of you, and I think because I talk to so many women, and it's midlife and beyond. I'm turning 60, so midlife and beyond. I say it's not an age, it's an experience. It's like that pivot point where you start, figuring out who you are, what you really want in life, and start going for it. But this becomes a real common theme, the spiritual part of it, which is really the essence of who we are, right? But we don't necessarily know that when, we're human doings and we start becoming human beings.
Yeah, I think that's so. I mean, again, different chapters. It's my son is 26. It's his time to be, defining himself and defining his goals and making his way. And and at this point, well, like the warrior turned poet, the warrior turned healer, there is that natural turning point in our lives when you have, hopefully, the time to contemplate deeper things. And also, we've had more times when life has just brought you to your knees, right?
Well, 2020 brought a lot of us to our knees, I know. And, fortunately, there's also many gifts in it. Like, clearly you had a beautiful gift, which I love. It's a happy story. And, before we wrap up today, I would love for you to share with our audience. We have so many women out there. I was divorced in a horrendous marriage that I left, but so many women out there have, Loretta had multiple marriages. She found love later in life. Barbie found love later in life after not having such a good love life. So what advice would you give women out there who, maybe they've lost hope, maybe they're still holding out a little bit of hope, but in finding that, that true love, as we start learning to love ourselves, I believe there's a lot of hope out there for finding love later in life.
Yes, I suppose the thing is that any one of us, all we want to do is to live your life to the fullest. At every phase of our lives, you don't want to, hopefully, not leave something on the table. So, look, none of us can control much of the circumstances of our life, and so I would say, well, just hope is a beautiful thing to have for all aspects of our life, for health and cooking a lovely dinner, or enjoying a partner or a friend, and there are no guarantees. I mean, life is a self-made job. So, but I know now things shift. Life is so full of surprises. It's whatever the circumstances are, good, bad, or indifferent, they won't stay that way. The energy will change, life will intervene, some new influence, if we're resilient and if we keep doing the work on ourselves and keep seeking to express ourselves in the fullest way we can.
So true. And like you said, life can change on a dime, and it did for all of us, really, last year. And I know many of us are pivoting, and I think that's the beauty of this universe. There's so many gifts in there. We start finding a different way to live and to be, and hopefully we will get back and I'll be able to see you in person one day. But right now this is it. This is our medium. So, well, thank you so much. You are so lovely. It's been wonderful to be with you. And, please let our audience know if they want to connect with you. I know where to find you. But if they want to read this blog, that I think your blog is, it's a gem. It's a hidden gem, especially now. It's beautiful. It really is. You're a gifted writer, and you're able to put things into words that are very hard to put into words.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed the exercise of it. It's just sort of a self-imposed life assignment. It's called Blue Pearl. I like the color blue, and the pearl is just obviously a play on my last name, but just the thought of we all swallow plenty of grains of sand, and hopefully we make the best of it. So pearl seemed to be the right metaphor for it. So
it's a beautiful metaphor.
Thanks.
Wonderful. So
yeah.
Oh,
I was going to say, I just started doing a new series, just a recurring role. Speaking of women, with the Jean Smart, who I adore, what a doll, and who actually reminds me a lot of Lucille Ball. And it's a show on HBO Max. I play her sister, and
what was she on that I remember? I can picture her, visualize her. What did I?
Designing Women was probably.
Yeah, that's what it was. That's what it was. She's a big presence, a colorful personality.
Yeah, really beautiful, incredibly talented. But there's, a woman who has just, she keeps reinventing and she keeps going. And anyway, she's a bright star in many ways, not the least of which is that she's a gal in whatever stage of life she's in who just keeps going. So
we keep having stages, all the world's a stage, right? And we're all actors on this stage, and we get as many acts and third acts and fourth acts and fifth acts as we choose and as the universe allows. So wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being with us, and Barbie Holmes for connecting us. And yeah, you're absolutely delightful. And thank you so much, beauties, for being with us. Thank you for being part of the Forever Fierce community and the Mastering Midlife community. If you love this show, please share it with your friends and leave a wonderful comment too. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And that's it for now. Cheers, beauties. Stay fierce.